So I'll call the meeting to order. This is the Town of Lancaster Conservation Commission meeting of October 8th, 2024. I'll start the meeting by calling the roll. Jim LaValle.
Here.
Dennis Hubbard.
Here.
David Millett. David, you're on mute.
Sorry, I muted the wrong thing. Here.
Yep, okay. Tom Seidenberg is also here. Member Carl Fawcett is not here. We also have our conservation agent, Brad Stone. First item on the agenda is a continued notice of intent hearing for Zero Heritage Lane, construction of a driveway crossing and single family home. Brad, I think you just said this will be continued.
That's correct.
Brad.
Sorry, go ahead, Dennis.
I think I was going to ask the same thing. So go ahead, Tom.
What meeting?
The next meeting, October 22nd.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to continue the notice intent hearing for Zero Heritage Lane to our next meeting on October 22nd, 2024.
I'll second.
All right, motion was made by Dennis, seconded by David to continue to October 22nd. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Next up on the agenda, 10 Fire Road 54 has already been continued to October 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Brad?
That's correct.
Okay. Agenda item number 3, we have continued notice of intent for 121 Fire Road 11, retaining wall replacement and site improvements. Is this also being continued?
Yes, to the 22nd.
Okay, happy to take a motion for that.
I'll make a motion to continue our notice of intent for 121 Fire Road 11 to October 22nd, 2024.
I'll second.
Right, motion was made by Dennis, seconded by David to continue to October 22nd. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Next up on the agenda, we have a continued request for determination of applicability for removal of dead trees from the Seven Bridge Road right-of-way. This is also going to be continued to the 22nd, Brad?
That's correct.
Happy to take a motion for that.
I'll make a motion to continue the request for determination of applicability for removal of dead trees within the Seven Bridge Road right-of-way to October 22nd, 2024.
I'll second.
All right, motion was made by Dennis, seconded by David to continue to the 22nd. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett. You're on mute again, David.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Okay, making quick work of this agenda. Let's see, that was number 4. Number 5, we have a continued notice of intent for New England Power Company for right-of-way easements, construction and access of road improvements, and permanent work pads serving transmission lines. I see some folks on the call for this. If you could please identify yourself for the record and go ahead.
I'm Jen Bonta with TRC, and I believe Erin Wariski from National Grid is also on the call. She's traveling at the moment, though, so she won't be able to show her face. Since the last meeting, we were asked to have an on-site visit with Brad, and we were also asked about the permanent impacts that were going to be happening on the right-of-way. And you should have received a packet showing and calling out on the maps all of the specific permanent impacts that are going to occur along the right-of-way and what exactly they're for. And the meeting that happened today, there was a little bit of discussion about a wetland around structure 213 that seems to be slightly within the right-of-way where we did not have it mapped. And we looked for the data in our system and we actually couldn't find it. So we're going to have someone go out there on Friday to add flag locations so we can update that on the map for you.
Can you just repeat that? That was at structure 219, you said?
213, I believe.
213, okay.
Yes.
Hey,
Thanks. Yep.
Tom, just for the record, I said this last hearing. I'm in a butter, so I'll be abstaining on this one.
Yep. Thanks, Dennis. Okay, sorry to interrupt. You can continue if you had more.
Those were the only things that were brought up last meeting that I wanted to bring up. I don't know if there's any other questions or concerns at this time.
Okay, Brad?
So yes, we did walk most of the area today, and the information that you heard is correct. I did see there was some vegetated wetland area in the vicinity of pole 213. So that will need to be added and shown on the plan. And in addition to that, we looked a little bit at the replication area, which was kind of near the entrance to the easement from Main Street or North Main Street there. And I looked at the replication plan as well. It's a small area and it's fairly flat, so I'm not concerned with it ultimately functioning. I would just like to see the flags at that location though, if they aren't there, and those numbers put on the replication plan. I think that should be something that can be pretty quickly added, just so when that work is actually being done, we can just confirm that that replication area has been created in the location that it should be.
Okay. Are you saying both flags on the plan set and in the field?
Yeah, so we actually didn't walk the line to look for them today. A lot of the other flags were pretty close to where we were looking, but the replication area in particular, they weren't on the plan. I think once they're on the plan, I can even go out on my own and quickly look and make sure they're there. It's right by the roadway. But yeah, just they should be on the plan with some numbers. I think what's shown on the replication plan is just the outline of the BVW and not flag
Okay.
locations themselves.
Okay, we can do that.
But other than that, I didn't really have any concern with the work that will be done in terms of where the swamp maps would be going. Some areas may need a little bit of temporary fill on the access road that I don't think might have been pointed out. But even if that's the case, it's not concerning on my end. I've seen some of these projects before, not just for this type of utility, but swamp maps for other reasons as well. And in traversing that line today, I don't have really any concerns with what will be happening there.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Brad. Commissioners, any comments or questions? Seeing none, any comments or questions from the general public? Not seeing any. Oh, right. I don't remember if I mentioned this at the last meeting, but the packet is asking for a 5-year permit. So under WPA, we can do that, but under the bylaw, we can't issue a 5-year permit. for things that are not basically vegetation management, we can issue a 4-year permit, or rather a 3-year permit and a 1-year extension. But I don't think we would be able, under the bylaw, to issue a 5-year permit for this project.
Okay. Then I guess the 4-year, 3-year, 1 extension year could probably be sufficient.
Okay. There's something in chat. Phil Lawler asked in chat, how many times can a hearing be continued? I think that was probably in reference to one of our previous hearings. And the answer is so long as they're pursuing a project, it can be continued as many times as the commission feels like we're still making progress. Since a peer review is outstanding, personally, I feel like the commission is still making progress. Sorry for that interrupt. I didn't notice the chat before. Just wanted to answer that. So back to this hearing. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? Brad, do you want these? So I think you had a couple of action items. So I think that we would be looking at a continuance at this point.
I would suggest that. I always like to see everything on record in terms of the approvals, and those wetland, the area that's not mapped on the plans for the wetland, those flags are in the field. They should be pretty easy to pick up. It's right by the access road. Same thing with their application area. Just reestablish some that might be missing if they are, and then we can take a quick peek and just confirm that where those flag numbers are in the field, they match what's on the plan, and we have that record so that when they do their application, we know it's going to work.
Okay, thanks, Brad. So since I didn't hear any comments from the commission, and Brad, it seems like you're pretty good other than those minor action items. It seems like we should be all good next meeting, assuming that those action items are closed. Yeah. So would you like to request a continuance? Our next meeting is the 22nd.
Yes, I'd like to request a continuance to the 22nd.
Okay. Happy to take a motion.
Yeah, I'll make that motion. We continue this to 22 October.
Second.
Right. Motion was made by Jim, seconded by David to continue to the 22nd. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Abstain.
Abstained. Yeah. David Millett.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Yep.
Thanks, you too. Okay, next up on the agenda, we have a continued notice of intent for 0 Hilltop Road, construction of a roadway and utility infrastructure at 0 Hilltop Road. I do see Frank McPartland from Dillis and Roy. Frank, why don't you introduce yourself and anyone else who might be on the call for this if you want to. Note your presence for the record. I'd be happy to, if you want to just raise your hand, or when we get to public comment, please, if you want to be noted in the record, at least in public comment, please raise your hand. So go ahead, Frank.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Seidenberg. My name is Frank McPartland with Dillis and Roy. I'm the engineer of record on behalf of this project. The applicant, James Whitney and Nicole Ferguson, are also online and attending this hearing. Let me see. So what we've submitted for you is an notice of intent package to cover the infrastructure associated with the subdivision that is before the town of Lancaster for the property known as Zero Hilltop Road. If I may, can I share my screen?
Please do.
All right. So what I am currently sharing is a kind of a rendering of the overall infrastructure project associated with the subdivision. What we have along my cursor, if you can see that, kind of oriented along the bottom of the plan, is Hilltop Road. George Hill Road goes off to the end here. This parcel here is 679 George Hill Road. This parcel is 201 Hilltop Road. And then what's rendered here is the subject property known as Zero Hilltop Road. There is an existing wetland complex located along Hilltop Road that runs northerly along the western property boundary of the property. There is another wetland complex with a town of Lancaster stream buffer running across the property here. And then there's another isolated wetland in the middle of the roadway here. We have a roadway that runs in a closed loop coming off of Hilltop Road, approximately 700 feet, and then continuing around until it joins back up. The roadway and the infrastructure catches the 100-foot buffer of this wetland associated with 201 Hilltop Road that was delineated under Mass DEP file number 193-0595, and catches a little bit of this one as well, part of the same filing. And then on site, part of the roadway goes through the 100-foot buffer in this location, through the 100-foot buffer along here, and then the storm water basins in the back catch the 100-foot buffer and the 200-foot town of Lancaster stream buffer with grading in this location. And then here, it just catches the 100-foot, the edge of the 100-foot buffer. The original package that I had submitted to you had 2 stormwater basins in the back here. The second one was firmly in the town of Lancaster and wetland DEP jurisdictional areas. However, during the course of the stormwater review with the town of Lancaster Planning Board peer reviewer, I was able to eliminate that basin, and this area is all now outside of jurisdictional areas. What I have currently proposed for the stormwater basins is they will function as basically a bioretention area and extended stormwater detention. The inverts of the basin will be planted with basically various perennials and shrubs that are kind of feet wet species that work in bioretention systems. I have them proposed at a rate of 1 perennial plant per 10 square foot of basin area and 1 shrub per 40, with a kind of a selection of plantings for that. We have received comments from both Bradstone as well as Mass DEP. We have actually received our Mass DEP file number, which for the record is number 193-0630. We received that on October 4th. and I believe Brad and the commission was copied on that on those comments as well. I don't know if you want at this time, I could go through some of the initial comments that Brad had provided, as well as what came from Mass DEP, or we open it up to the discussion with the commission itself. I do know that a site walk is proposed with or not proposed, but scheduled with Ecotech, who will be the commission's peer reviewer, along with our wetland scientist, Matt Morrow of Morrow Consulting. And I believe Brad will be attending that as well. I believe the date is...
It's October 16th.
October 16th. Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
Also on is Matt Morrow, our wetland consultant.
Okay, Brad, I don't know if you want to put in your comments now and then go through the draft response letter that Frank has there, or if you want Frank just to continue.
No, why don't I just speak real quick if that's helpful? So in terms of the comment letter that I provided the commission and copied the applicant on, that was really a pretty bare bone cursory review.
Correct.
At the time, the plans were pretty incomplete. There wasn't much there of substance to actually sit down and provide a lot of comments where you're going to be close to getting to the point where you could address something and be done the next meeting, for instance. And I had a conversation with the design engineer on that. So I think we were on the same page that yes, revisions would be coming at some point. But we also don't have those submitted to the commission at this point as well. So what's been submitted is that initial plan set.
Yes.
Right. So there's not much worth discussing in terms of my comments at this point, I would say. I don't think it's a good use of time tonight unless there's something specific either the commission or the applicant maybe wants to address on that. But really, I'm going to be looking at what I hope is a much more complete set of plans and providing comments, and hopefully we can make progress once I see that.
Yes, and I will be submitting plans very, very soon. We were in the process of actively making revisions with the peer reviewer on the planning side, and I wanted to make sure that those were all captured on the notice of intent plans. So I believe I have that, and I'll be forwarding updated copies this week.
Okay. So Frank, if you want to go through and discuss some of your responses, that's fine. If you think we should wait until the commission has had a chance to see the updated plans, that might, and that Brad has had a chance to do a deeper dive, that might also make sense.
I think that's probably the most helpful path forward would be to do that second option. A lot of what Brad brought up and what Mass DEP asked about is covered in these in these updated design items. So if I provide that, and then I can discuss with Brad and see if there are any other questions, we can certainly hopefully have a lot of that cleared up.
Okay. I guess that makes sense. So I guess my next question. So commissioners, does anyone have any questions or comments at this stage? So I'm not seeing any hands. I do have some comments. So So my first comment is, and I asked the question at the definitive subdivision hearing, so this won't be essentially a new comment. But I am disappointed that the open space was removed from the plan. You know, from my point of view, I thought that the open space that was on the preliminary subdivision plan was a generous counterbalance to the impacts proposed by the subdivision. Furthermore, I would note that the environmental report provided in the submission mentioned several times the open space. So presumably that mention was, you know, due to the report being assembled in reference to the preliminary subdivision plan. You know, I think that's a defect in the report, that it refers to an open space that counterbalances the impacts when in fact the open space is not proposed. My next comment is that, you know, I recognize that the proposal in front of us is just for the road. However, I have reviewed the definitive subdivision plan and the previous preliminary plans. And I think it's important to note that the Lancaster Wetlands Protection Bylaw presumes that buffer zones are significant to the interests of the bylaw. Or to say that another way, buffer zone encroachment is not by right. You know, so I think the applicant needs to address that. The applicant has the burden of overcoming that presumption. So having said that, I acknowledge that a circular road configuration is beneficial for public safety and infrastructure reasons. So I don't strongly object to the roadway plan. However, outside of the road, my expectation is that encroachment into buffer zones will be minimized. That's how I view it. It's not obvious to me that several of the proposed houses and their associated lawns will fit without encroachments into the buffer zone. I believe that the applicant will be filing notices of intent for the houses as they come up for construction. Personally, I'm very unlikely to vote to approve an order of conditions for a lot that contains significant encroachment, unless the applicant clearly overcomes the presumption of significance or otherwise advances the interests of the bylaw. That's, you know, so that's why I was particularly disappointed when the open space was removed from the plan. You know, so the applicant has chosen to subdivide this parcel as they see fit. I don't think the commission is under any obligation to approve individual lot notices of intent that contain encroachments for hardship reasons, because the hardship is created by the applicant. So I just wanted to put that out there. That's how I feel about this project. You know, I think that I'm comfortable with approving the road. You know, as I said, I think there's good reasons to have the circular road, and so the encroachment through those buffer zones, you know, while I'm not happy to see them, you know, I understand why, from a public safety or infrastructure reason, those make sense. It does make sense to have a loop in the neighborhood. What doesn't make sense to me is a number of these lots that clearly require further encroachments. So, and then I have a couple of questions about the stormwater basins. So when the project is completed, who will own the stormwater basins? Are those transferred to the towns, or are they part of the lots that they're embedded in?
Jim and Nicole, do you have
if and when the roadway gets turned over to the town as a public way, then those basins would be included in that taking. Until then, it would remain private.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So I think that's
all of the storm water features that are outside of the right-of-way are within easement areas. So that includes the basin, fencing, and discharges.
Okay. Commissioners or Brad, any further questions or comments before I open it to the public? Okay, Dennis, go ahead.
Just continuing on with some of what you said, you know, I actually think I understand the need for the round road, but I don't necessarily think where we've, you know, so cutting through kind of in the central area, I get cutting through the buffer there for safety and access. Some of the other roadways, though, I could see those being tweaked so that they're outside the buffer zone. So I'm not sure we need to hit all of the small little buffer zone areas. I definitely get the general loop. I'm less inclined to, you know, I'm going to want to see some real reasons why we have to take that buffer and not protect that buffer. Or, you know, where are we getting extra, you know, betterment someplace else in the site? So I've got concerns with the plan as is. So I know more details coming, but in general, this one's hard to swallow.
Thank you, Dennis. Brad, go ahead.
So, with respect to maintenance and ownership, so I'll ask the applicant, has that been discussed with the DPW in terms of if the town were to accept the roadway infrastructure, that they would take on the stormwater infrastructure in the easement areas as well?
I haven't had a discussion with them, no.
Okay, because I know I haven't been here that long, but I was under the impression that the town didn't take that approach. I'm not certain of that. I'll have to ask staff that I work with as well. But that I have that question. And the reason I'm asking is, you know, part of what I'll be looking at with the future review is to see in terms of ownership and maintenance, what's going to happen during construction in the interim as well as post-construction. So if the town's not going to accept that, will there be an HOA, for instance, and how's that going to be established and what's the funding source? That's important, I think, for part of the permit process so that we know that it is going to be maintained, whether it's the town doing it at a future point or if it's going to remain private in perpetuity, if there's an adequate HOA set up for that.
Thanks, Brad. David Millett.
I just wanted to join in your thoughts about this plan, and that, you know, while there's time to change it, that it's probably should be changed to protect those buffer zones, and that they should take that into account when they're providing further planning. That's it.
Thank you, David. Commissioners or Brad, any further questions or comments? Seeing none, I'm going to open it up to the general public. I ask that you please identify yourself for the record. There were several messages posted in chat. If you want those in the record, the chat isn't recorded. So if you want those in the record, please make your comments. So please raise your hand so that I can recognize you if you would like to speak.
Can you hear me?
Yes, James House, go ahead.
Yeah, it's James House. I apologize, the hand thing's not working on my Zoom. Yeah, so just with the I think.
Sorry, James, could you please identify yourself and your address for the record?
Yes, this is James House. I live at 495 George Hill Road, Lancaster. Dennis mentioned that about the road, and I was just wondering whether the plan's going to reflect any new data. You know, is there a new wetland survey going to be done, species assessment on wildlife, etc.? I believe that the old surveys were old, and that wetland delineation may have changed somewhat since, and it may be that 100-foot protection zone is actually extended further out even.
So the applicant has provided an environmental report, and the applicant's representatives have resurveyed the wetland boundaries. The commission will be requiring a peer review of the wetland boundaries. So that will all ultimately be reflected on the plan once the commission's peer reviewer and the applicant's representative agree on the wetland delineation. That will be reflected in the plans.
Okay, that's good. And then another question I had was what Frank McPartland said about relying on perennials, wetland perennials, to basically absorb some of that water. What's going to be done? I mean, how are they going to manage to ensure that 10 years down the line that a resident's going to understand the importance of having those perennials in their landscape? And, you know, perennials die off too. And so it would seem that if you can't guarantee that, then there could be flooding going on or so forth. So I'm just wondering how we're going to ensure that they keep those perennials there.
So that's in part why I was asking about what happens, who owns the basins, and why Brad had a couple of questions about that. So that's definitely something the commission will want to understand. It's also something that I think the planning board, since this is stormwater, and the planning board is the authority for stormwater, usually in a development like this, a requirement of the stormwater permit would be an operation and maintenance plan. That's part of the design process for the stormwater system. That would basically outline how the basins are managed and maintained. You know, personally, what I think happens is that those basins are left to some nebulous person to maintain, and that person doesn't maintain them, whether the assumption is that will be the town or the landowner. You know, I walk by several stormwater basins on my regular walk around the neighborhood. And it's pretty clear to me that if those basins had an operations and maintenance plan, nobody's following it because there's trees growing in the basins now. So that's something that I will personally be interested in understanding, that's covered, because I don't think that we as a town have been doing a good job of making sure that base is covered. But it's not really the commission's jurisdiction. The maintenance of those stormwater basins is really the planning board's jurisdiction, or at least the approval of those plans. And what happens after the development is done, honestly, I don't know. I think that's probably a gap. Brad, I think you raised your hand because you wanted to chime in. Go ahead.
Sure. Actually, Tom, I'm not sure that's the case. So planning board does have authority and jurisdiction under the stormwater bylaw, but the commission absolutely has jurisdiction over stormwater as well in jurisdictional areas. As the applicant's representative mentioned near the beginning of the hearing, I think they indicated some of the stormwater infrastructure in terms of the point source discharges was pulled out of jurisdictional areas. But stormwater management had its roots for a long time under the Wetlands Protection Act. So both the commission and the planning board are essentially stormwater approving authorities for this project. It's not just the planning board here.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Thanks for the clarification.
Is there going to be anything in the plan also to preserving the waterways? Because City of Lancaster has the longest stretch of the Nashua River, and Hilltop being the high ground there, it's going to have all the feeding systems that feed that river and keep those ecosystems down the hill going and alive. Is there any scope in the plans for preserving those?
Well, so I guess I have two answers to that. So the plans don't directly address that question. You're not going to find anything in the plans that address that question. However, the presumption is that if the applicant shows that they meet the performance standards for the bylaw and the Wetlands Protection Act, the presumption is that they've done what they've needed to do. The Lancaster bylaw is more protective than the Wetlands Protection Act. So we are going to be, within our jurisdiction, making sure that the resource areas are protected. But the general question, the applicant still has plenty of buildable land on this lot. The commission has no voice on the areas outside of its jurisdiction. So it is what it is. If they meet the performance standards, the presumption is that the environment has been protected to the extent that it can be under the laws that we have. I don't know if that answers your question, but
yeah, it kind of does. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else in the public have comments or questions? I see Adam Zand. Please identify yourself for the record.
Hi, thank you. Adam Zand, 202 Hilltop Road. I just have a general question, not necessarily about the project. It sort of is to do with the road that's going in, and that's a pretty substantial turnaround if you look at the map. And a lot of trees are going to have to taken up, sort of similar to some of the drainage issues we were talking about. Are there rules in place about do the tops of the trees or the root structure have to remain underground? It's just more of a general question for the Conservation Committee. But if the project wants to address it as well, too, I'm happy to hear about that.
So I might defer to Brad to answer this question, but I guess my first comment is, outside of jurisdictional areas, the commission really has no comment or authority. So the vast majority of the trees that will be taken down by this project are outside of our jurisdiction. That would be a stormwater issue, and so that would be the purview of the planning board. Within jurisdictional areas, I certainly would defer to the commission's peer reviewer and the commission's agent on whether or not, if a tree's cut, we should leave the stump. But, presumably any trees that are cut inside jurisdictional areas are going to be cut for a reason. They're going to be cut to place a house, the road, or, landscaping. I'm pretty sure no one's going to want the stumps to remain in those cases. So I'm pretty sure that every tree that's cut in this project, the stump would be removed. And that would be part of the commission's consideration for those trees in jurisdictional areas. I don't know, Brad, if you want to chime in any more on that.
No, I mean, typically in construction, you're not leaving, part of the tree behind. The only time you might do is when you have some small tree removal projects, single family homeowners, for instance, where you might have something dying or close to a home. If you can leave part of it standing for habitat, you do. But when you have a new subdivision construction project, you're not leaving, portions of the tree behind. That's not typical. Also, while I'm speaking, for clarification on the peer review, so the peer review for the commission, we've lined up to look at the resource areas. So that's what they're currently engaged to do. So any additional review in terms of performance standards for the commission, that will be left up to myself and to provide input to the commission and ultimately to the commission to decide. So the peer review consultant won't be looking at tree removals or other additional impacts for the stormwater or another construction portion. They're looking at simply the resource areas.
Okay, thanks, Brad.
And I do want to note, as far as tree removal goes, my client has expressed to me on a number of occasions that they're not looking to clear cut this site. Within the they're looking to limit that to what needs to be cut down for the road, what needs to be cleared for drainage and infrastructure, and what needs to be cleared for the homes. So that I did want to note that.
Great, thank you. Mr. Zand, you're all set? Anyone else?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the answers.
Welcome. Anyone else, commissioners or public? I'm not seeing any further hands. So I think, unless anyone else has anything to add, we're probably at the point for continuance. I did have a question, Brad, about the site visit. What day was that again?
Check real quick. I believe it's next Wednesday. That's correct. It's next Wednesday, the 16th.
Okay. I would like to participate in that.
I'll send you the information, Tom.
Okay, thanks. So Frank, do you think that you'll be all set for our next meeting, or did you want a longer continuance?
No, I would like to. I think we'll be set for the next hearing. I'll have the revised documents to the commission, and then the site meeting. The site meeting would be the 16th. And yeah, I feel comfortable with the 22nd with what I know at this time.
Okay. If there's no further discussion or questions, I'd be happy to take the motion to continue.
I will. Motion to continue to 22 October.
I'll second.
All right. Motion was made by Jim and seconded by Dennis to continue to October 22nd. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Let's see. Next up on our agenda is an update for the enforcement order for 397 Centerbridge Road.
Sure. So after the last meeting, had a quick exchange with town council, but actually have not proceeded with that yet, because during the process, even before I could provide them all the information to date, the property owner walked into my office. So they did mention that they have engaged a civil firm to assist them with the enforcement order. So clearly they do have it. I'll be honest, there was a little bit of a language barrier when we were trying to discuss where they were at. I did get the engineering firm's name, so I have that at least. I don't know who's handling it for the owner. So this was mid last week. I will reach out to the engineering firm since I haven't heard yet and see if I can poke someone there, provide information to us that yes, indeed, they are working on it. And if I don't get anywhere, either with the property owner or the, alleged consultant at this point, I would say, then I'll go back to town council and use resources to get them working for us. But I was kind of surprised. I did see the owner, so I'll be optimistic at this point now and see if we move forward a little bit more by next meeting.
Yeah, great. That's good news. I'm glad that we finally have some forward progress. Thanks. Commissioners, any questions or comments?
No, it's a good sign. Seems like it's headed in the right direction.
Right. Moving on. General discussion regarding updating the wetlands protection bylaw. So I did spend a very small amount of time looking at the bylaw. The only thing, like I said, a little amount of time. So amongst the things that Brad and I had discussed in the past is the list of jurisdictional areas. And the fact that we intermingle the buffer zones and the jurisdictional areas together into one list. So I drafted up basically a rewrite of that list, splitting it into 3 sections. So essentially section 1 would be wetlands, with subsections A through L being the existing resource areas. So wetlands, any wetlands, marshes, wet meadows, blah, 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 all the way through lands under water bodies. Then 2 additional lettered subsections. M, the no touch zone, lands adjoining these resource areas out to 25 feet. And N, the buffer zone, lands adjoining these resource areas out to a distance of 100 feet. Then subsection 2 would be rivers, which would be A, rivers, B, streams, brooks, and creeks, whether perennial or intermittent. Subsection D, the riverfront area, lands adjoining these resource areas out to a distance of 200 feet. And subsection D, there is no buffer zone. Just to be explicit, there is no buffer zone for these resource areas. And then subsection 3, floodplain. So A and B, land subject to flooding, and B, floodplain overlay district. And then C, explicitly, there is no buffer zone for these areas. So I think that's a pretty straightforward change that I think would be a very straightforward article at town meeting. I think, though, that I'm going to continue walking through the bylaw. What I think I'll do is I'll produce a red line version. I'll bring the bylaw into a Word document and create a red line version with these changes. And then just keep going through some of the other things that Brad and I have discussed. I'm going to try and stop myself from adding things. I've been making a list over the last few years of things I would like to improve, but I'm going to resist. I'm going to try and keep this first pass as just clarifications, but fix the warts that people have observed in the bylaw, and not try to really do something new. But having said that, I do think that I want to add some things to the bylaw, but I think we can save that to a future discussion. So that's as far as I've gotten. Like I said, I haven't spent much time on it. I don't know if anybody has any. Oh, Jim, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, good job, Tom. I think the plain is one area that's been, not so clear to me. So you said there is no buffer zone to the floodplain. I agree with that. But do we want to consider any exceptions to the floodplain? So, I mean, there are houses in the floodplain, right? So should we have some exceptions in those cases? And the floodplain also seems to be a particularly not well-defined area.
So I think for definitions, maybe we can refer to either the FEMA flood zone. So the overlay district, I'm assuming we have a map for that. I didn't go looking for it, but since it's called an overlay district, I assume that the town has a specific map for that. So let me just say that that's well defined. Land subject to flooding, maybe that's not well defined as it stands, but if we refer to the appropriate set of FEMA maps, I think that makes that well defined. Does that help?
Well, I don't know. I'm just thinking about the school that's right across the Drumlin, Dexter Drumlin. We had a project a couple years ago. They wanted to level that field, but it was in the floodplain. They had the floodplain reassessed, and it's not in the floodplain. So I don't know how accurate those maps are. That's my comment. Yeah.
Brad, go ahead.
So some of the things I'm hearing I can comment on, and also I want to see if maybe we can possibly take a step backwards before we get too far ahead of ourselves with bylaw revisions. So with respect to trying to rewrite it and, fix what we think might be ambiguous or, even worse than that, what's not working, I would suggest the commission focus on what they want above and beyond the Wetlands Protection Act, making sure that that's either in existence with the bylaw or something that may need to be added. And then in terms of fixing definitions and things of that nature, I may have mentioned it in another meeting. I'm not sure that trying to rewrite language similar to those paragraphs in our bylaw may work that well without making it overly complicated. It's been a while since I've looked at a lot of communities, but I was doing it for, a municipality that was trying to get a bylaw in place unsuccessfully for years. Finally did, fortunately, after I left. But the ones I looked at, and in addition to that, like MACC's model that a lot of towns base theirs off of, my recollection is it grabbed the definitions from the Wetlands Protection Act, so that if you ran into instances where, like we had on a previous project not long ago, how's our riverfront different from the Wetland Protection Act riverfront, things of that nature, because it was never really defined. Well, if we want to grab those definitions from existing regs and if somebody's got a great bylaw or the model one that's out there works, then that may be a simple fix. And then the definitions that we're making sure are different than those are what we specifically want in our bylaw. And I've already experienced what the commission wants to keep there in some of these projects. Things like the vernal pool, for instance, very important. Then you make sure that definition's clear, and you focus on fixing that kind of thing, as well as the whole previously developed areas, things of that nature. That question we've got. So rather than trying to rewrite it at this point, if there's these other questions in terms of what's not working, that's poorly defined, that's going to be Lancaster specific, put some thought into that. But if it's generally the same practice as the Wetlands Protection Act, but it may not have grabbed it under the Wetlands Protection Act, for instance, with streams, because the streams that are intermittent, we're classifying as perennial here in Lancaster, then you're simply kind of copying that definition potentially that's already there and making sure that that's in the bylaw rather than trying to rewrite all these sections that to me just seemed already poorly written and I'm picturing it's just going to be not as simple fix, for instance. So I'm hesitant to try to put a lot of effort into rewriting at this point and would suggest if it makes sense to everyone, just focus on the bullets of, the problems we might have, what you want to keep, and how we can possibly change those areas and worry about the language of the definitions and those other things a little bit later, if that's helpful. That's the approach I would suggest. I myself have not had time to look too much into that other than some casual notes I've made on these items as we run into them. But I'm going to be tied up for a little bit with a town project that our department in DPW are working on that's going to keep me busy for a little bit. But once we get into winter time, I'm hoping I'll have more time to focus on this kind of thing. Any thoughts, questions, or?
So I guess I'm not really sure then, Brad, what I should be thinking about. So I started here because this was one of the recent questions that we had discussed, right? Like the fact that the buffer zone definitions were intermingled with the resource area definitions, and so the whole section was kind of ambiguous. And so I thought I'd start there. Let's get rid of this ambiguity. And what you brought up with the riverfront, we had that project with the house on Main Street, where that was, questioning that. And then, of course, we have the ongoing question about what developed means. That's certainly one of the ones I'm going to think about. And I don't know if that's, I don't think we're going to rewrite the whole bylaw. I mean, so you mentioned the model bylaw. I don't think we're going to talk about a swap, right?
No, but I really do think that, before we run into other potential problems with definitions that we haven't run into yet, by not grabbing and mirroring what's already in existence, we may potentially be running into the next interpretation of some other different type of developed area kind of scenario. So sure. This is what every bylaw consultant, that I've worked with for other reasons, not Lawrence Protection Act, you make use of what statutes are already out there. You kind of copy and paste what's there, and then put your above and beyond language in there for your bylaw. So my concern is, we already know some things that aren't working. So we should focus just on those in terms of rewriting. If we want to clean up that developed area language, that's absolutely something that we have to work on, that we couldn't grab and pull from something else. That's very unique to Lancaster, and at least my recollection of looking at other towns in the past. So that's, if we're looking at rewriting and cleaning up, I'm not convinced that it's going to be simple to try to just clean up some of the things we've already run into and get it to work ultimately the way it should. That's my concern there. And before I forget too, because I think Jim brought it up with respect to the floodplain. So we do have the zoning consideration, which is very driven by the National Flood Insurance Program. Lancaster is a member of that. Last I knew, there were only 4 communities in all of Massachusetts that weren't participants in that. So it's very popular. We do have to have that in our zone and regulations to be a member of that. And the Wetlands Protection Act has their own performance standards in that as well. Similar to the other local things I've talked about, we shouldn't try to rewrite that. The WPA and what's upcoming with I'm actually going to be meeting with the with members in the plan department and DCR because I do think the town's going to need to update our zoning on that in the near future. So we actually have a meeting scheduled later this month for that. So we'll go over some training matters there, anything that we may need to tweak zoning wise, and I can report back to the commission if I think there's something applicable we should have in our wetlands bylaw as well. But really the one thing I saw really different than everything else that's out there was that buffer zone to the floodplain, which I felt was very unique to anything I've ever seen before. So if there was something else floodplain related, I'll let me know and I'll jot it down, and it's another thing we can discuss with the bylaw revision. But a lot of that floodplain stuff is very much driven by the National Flood Insurance Program. And there's the other big reason for it is building construction as well. Which is, I'll go back to the enforcement order we had earlier on the agenda. I reached out to DCR as a potential enforcement route there, and because there was no building involved with that particular site, they didn't want to participate. So, there's gonna be a lot of overlap with a few different things there.
Okay, thanks, Brad. So any further discussion on updates? Okay, moving on. General discussion regarding the oversight of open space parcels. So at the town meeting last night, the town did transfer a number of parcels to the care of and custody of the Conservation Commission. The town did approve the acceptance of the land for Hawthorne Lane, and whether that gets transferred to the commission would be a future article at a future town meeting. I believe Administrator Hodges said that the commission will need to revote its acceptance of the parcels because it was a different board that voted to accept them last time. So several members have left. And so since we have different members now, she did say during one of the articles that we would need to revote our acceptance. I'm not exactly sure whether we need to revote all of our acceptances. So I don't want to do it today because it wasn't on our agenda, but we should put that on our next agenda to make sure that the commission revotes to accept the parcels. So the parcels transferred yesterday were the ones from Capital Group. And then the town did pass the CPA article for funding the Forest Legacy Grant. So that includes the transfer of the town forest to the commission and the granting of permanent conservation easements to I believe the Lancaster Land Trust. So I don't know what further actions the commission needs to take on that. Again, it was a different commission that voted to accept those proposals in the past. So I think we probably need to revote those just to make sure that everything's copacetic. I haven't spent any time thinking about beyond that oversight of our open space parcels and what our rules and regulations might be. But I do plan on working on that. I did have someone Brad, someone, I guess, came in and talked to you, reached out an email with a list of trails. So that was interesting to see. I did briefly look at the document. It only came today. It was a pretty short list. It doesn't look anything like the trails that I see on Mass Mapper. So I think, yeah. So the trail inventory is still something on our to-do list. Carl Fawcett reached out to me after the last meeting and expressed interest in getting more details on the open space parcels and that stuff. So I think Carl is going to be open to helping out and doing some of the legwork here. You know, I'm certainly open to doing some of the legwork since I spent all that time on the registry looking for all of the parcels that we had custody of. You know, I think as part of, I didn't save all the deeds. I should have done that. I was just looking for them. I wasn't thinking that I actually wanted to have them saved. But in hindsight, I should have done that because a number of those deeds had conditions, you know, certainly the conservation restrictions had conditions about, you know, what authority the commission actually had. Now, I'm not sure if the National River Greenway conservation restrictions, if they were put in place before the Rivers Protection Act, but it kind of read to me like that was kind of what the intent was, to protect those, the 200-foot riverfront area. A lot of them sort of served that purpose. And so they kind of felt superfluous to me in light of the Rivers Protection Act, but I don't know if those predated the Rivers Protection Act. But I don't think that the commission has right of access. We simply have right of review of activities in those areas. But those are conservation restrictions, not lands that we own. So anyway, I haven't done. Whoop, Tom Christopher, sorry, your chipmunk voice today. So I think Tom wanted to say something. You're gonna need to go out and come back in, Tom. Nope, still chipmunk voice. Sorry, Tom. We can't hear you.
How about that?
Oh, here we go. We can hear you now.
Sometimes the computer that I have doesn't link up with the camera that I have. But anyway, I actually wasn't making any comment. I was just clicking on to my own mute. But talking about open space, I'll just bend your ear for a few minutes. We did have a list that I probably still have in my file that includes trails, and I'm happy to send that over to you and Brad, so you have at least some background on that. Relative to the Cook conservation areas, I meant to comment the last time this came up for discussion, but the accuracy of the trails in that particular parcel are spot on. The Conservation Commission had a relationship with the engineering department of Worcester Polytech, and they sent out students to not only locate all the meets and bounds that you can see in the parcel, but also all the trails and the mileage distances that were incorporated into the sort of master trail map of that. The fact that the commission accepted those parcels from Capital Group now link all those trails together without having to trespass on any of the Capital Group's property. So that's really a good thing. There was one portion of the trail in there that's more or less meandered through a dumping area, or whatever you want to call it, under excavation at that time. So it was kind of difficult when folks get out there. They get confused and have to walk all the way back without actually finding the direct trail. But anyway, happy to help.
Thanks,
If you have
Tom.
any
Yeah.
questions, give a holler, and I still have a lot of information in my own files, and happy to pass it on if you have any questions.
Yeah, if you have documentation on the trails, yeah, that'd be great if you could send that to us.
Okay, I'll see if I can scout that out, and I'll send it along.
Thanks.
You guys are doing a great job. I'm really
Thanks.
really happy with the way you guys are working. Very impressed.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, Brad, go ahead.
So with respect to the trails and some of the other open space issues, absolutely, if the commission has any institutional knowledge, you've looked up deeds, for instance, Tom, anyone else that's been in town for a while, any information I'll gladly take and compile and put it in a central location. But similar to getting ahead of ourselves with the bylaw, so the town does need to update its open space and recreation plan. So Tom and I were both on an email exchange with somebody from the Recreation Committee as well. So I don't think this is, something that each board needs to kind of tackle independently or, working together occasionally. We do need to update this plan town-wide. We've had some internal discussions. We've talked about getting help possibly from the local planning agency, or possibly a consultant as well, things of that nature. I don't know what route we may go yet, but ultimately there will probably be opportunity for the different boards that typically oversee, trails, open space, things of that nature, to provide input and get together and collaborate on that. So yes, by all means, if there's information relative, from Conservation Commission's perspective for our parcels, we'll continue to compile that, or give me what you have as well, because that will be helpful for that. But I don't want the commission to think that this is something you need to do independently to kind of fix it on your own. You are going to have staff support on that. We do need to get that plan updated, and we may have outside assistance with that, by a consultant or something else. And we may be able, if we end up possibly going that route, they may be able to fill in the holes and do some research that we can't do our own, if title search comes up blank or whatever, things of that nature. So I would suggest finding what we can if you have time, and then what we can't figure out in terms of our commission parcels, we can look at a little bit more deeper as part of that process as well. It is an important plan for the town to update, so we do need to get going on that.
Yep. So Brad, are there going to be meetings for that?
I don't know the process. I simply raised the question not too long ago, if we've given any internal thought as to how that's going to be laid out. So they're still thinking about it. My experience in the past in different places is, ultimately you have a committee that's formed. It's usually comprised of staff and board members, for instance, public sometimes as well. It really depends on which route Lancaster wants to go with that. It's not a decision that I'm part of at this point, so it's just I wanted to let the commission know it's it's coming. We'll be able to provide input at some point, and to just let you know, it's not a these questions that you have isn't necessarily, or the recreation committee has, isn't something to kind of solve independently on your own. Staff will be working on this as well, and hopefully what I envision is there will be a collaborative effort at some point, if that makes sense. I don't have much in detail to provide you at this point, unfortunately, but I think it will probably move in a positive direction where everyone gets some input there.
Okay. Thanks. All right. Any further comments or discussion on open space? Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
I just had a question with respect to the Cook parcel, the order of conditions that was done for the regrading of the parking area there.
Yeah.
Can someone just fill me in on what was the intent of that project? I did meet with the DPW director out there, as well as somebody else to go over the work. But I just wanted to know from the commission's perspective, when that application in the order was issued, what was the project goal that the commission saw there?
So from my recollection, it was to fix the parking area. Detail-wise, I'd need to go back and look at the filing. Like that was like a year and a half ago when we approved that. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, that's my recollection too. Some of that, like when you enter that parking area, the road there, I call it a road, just the entryway to that area, it was very, very rough shape, very rutted. And in the wintertime, it's even worse. So that's my recollection.
So perhaps I can give you folks a little background on that. At one point, we had the general manager, PJ Keating, out to the parking lot, and Keating was interested in doing some sort of community service projects for whatever reason, but they were actually willing to pave that parking lot, but it would be up to us to bring the amount of gravel in that needed to be put in place. And there's also was a concern that eventually somebody was going to completely back over the edge of the parking area and get their car stuck and would have to have a wrecker haul it out. Over time, much of that steepness has eroded and gone into a culvert that goes under the access roadway and ultimately dumps into Spectacle Brook, which has a very close connection to the Nashua River. The purpose of the project was to remove that culvert, which was more than halfway filled with silt. And we had the DPW director out there a couple of times looking at it, and he said, I don't want to try to flesh this out. Let's just, if we're going to do some construction, let's just take the thing out and put a new one in that's more properly sized. And originally there was going to be a concrete block wall that was going to raise the parking grade up. Some fencing was going to put in so folks couldn't back over the top of the wall. And then Keating would come in and pave the project. That's the history on it. Obviously, there was some funding that was going to be necessary for that. And if some of you recall, John Farnsworth was the representative engineer for the Lancaster Land Trust. They were the ones, I believe, that originally submitted the application, and we approved the application. Having spent a lot of time down there personally with the Friends of the Nashua River and the students from Worcester Polytech, certainly I've taken the responsibility of making sure a lot of that work got done. And, you know, shortly after I've left the area, I won't say shortly after I left the area, but, you know, over time, that area has continued to degrade. I have been walking out there periodically. I like to take hikes in the morning, and it's good to see that the bridges that the Conservation Commission permitted are still in very good shape. And every morning that I go out there, that recreation area certainly gets a lot of use. You know, from very early in the morning, you know, 8:30, 9 o'clock, there's always people out there walking. So it's an important recreation area, and in terms of what we have available to the general public here in Lancaster, with the exception of Bartlett Park and that conservation area, I think these are the two primary places that folks in Lancaster go. And oftentimes, when I've been out there, I've run into people with from other towns, and I ask them where they're from, and well, I'm from here, or I'm from there. Well, why do you come here? That's quite a distance away. And the answer is, we're allowed to let our dogs run here. So that's a pretty interesting component that, for all intents, seems to be positive for people in the area. And there is also a hiking club that is based in Boston that visits different conservation areas throughout Massachusetts once a week, and I've run into them several times here at the Cooks. So that's as much as the background I can provide to you folks at this time.
Thanks, Tom. Brad, did you find the order of conditions in the plans? Did you have a chance to look at those?
I found the order of conditions. I looked at the plan. I met with so I asked the DPW director to meet Mr. Farnsworth and I out there, because the parking area is actually in the road right away. It's not on the commission's open space parcel. So I wanted to make sure that anything that was decided, it met the order of conditions, and the DPW director was happy with it. But what I left with in being on site was questioning what was being asked in terms of the work to be performed at this time really met any intent of what I could see that something would have been filed for, either to increase parking, prevent erosion of the parking lot, protect any resource area from sediment washing down through getting through that culvert and actually ultimately into the wetland resources, for instance. And I'm not convinced that the potential plan at this point achieves any of those goals. And my concern with the parking in particular is that, at least in the interim, there'd be a number of parking spaces lost. So, I do think it's probably best to have somebody from the commission out there when we review what's potentially going to be done before it happens in the future, just to, put a second set of eyes and ears on it, so that we're not doing something that is either a waste of time or ultimately going to be causing more problems. So I won't get into the specifics of what we talked about in the field, but hearing what the commission said and Mr. Christopher, I'm not convinced it's going to meet any of the goals I heard at this point. So I'd be more comfortable before anything happens if somebody else took a look at it with us.
Okay, sure. I mean, I can do that. So I'm looking at the plan now. just to refresh my memory. Yeah, so was there a discussion of replacing the culvert when you were
No.
there? Okay.
No.
Yeah, so I see the walls on the plan. Why don't I just share my screen so people can see what I'm seeing? So I've zoomed in. Part on the left is really the part at issue. So here's the current parking lot. Basically the blue area is where the old roadway, old paved area is. This black and orange line is more or less what so I spoke with Mr. Farnsworth a couple of weeks ago. He called me to talk about this project, and then I sent him to Brad. So he was saying that he could source some Jersey barriers to build this wall. I didn't look at the plan while talking to him. I didn't really recall exactly what was on the plan, but now that I'm seeing it, I now remember the culvert part of the plan. Yeah, so Brad, I guess to answer your question, if we're not doing the culvert, if all that's happening is we're just gonna block off this swale from being parked in, yeah, I don't think that's really the project as approved by the commission.
So the culvert was part of this.
I mean, it's certainly on the plan. Yeah. Can you see that now?
So I see that as. So this is where I have trouble with these plans. I can't sort out what's existing conditions and what's proposed. What's on the, if we pan to the right, Tom, is there?
It's just the same thing, more busy. It's got all the
Yeah.
So it's got all the survey points on it. So as you were talking and I was looking at the plan, my vague recollection was that replacing the culvert was part of the plan, but it seems like you're not sure that that was in the NOI.
I'll have to double check on that. I mean, my main focus when I saw the concrete barriers, and then I started looking at what was approved. What was approved was a block wall without any fall protection, which I had some concern over because it was 4-foot vertical drop, things of that nature. There's no guardrail proposed, so I wanted to see what was specifically supposed to happen with respect to the parking area. But then on site, in going over potentially where those concrete barriers are going to be placed, it would essentially kind of eliminate some of that parking and quite a bit of it in that general vicinity. And I think what was talked about was they would be put there to cut back on the erosion getting into that area beyond it. But concrete barriers aren't necessarily the right thing for that either. You're gonna have stuff meandering through the joints and other things. So that was my main thing tonight, was what was really the intent in making sure that what they want to do out there meets that. And I think I have more questions than answers at this point now. So I think another on-site review before anything happens is definitely important. I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing. One of the main questions I asked is, how busy is this site? Because in the middle of a weekday, there were quite a few cars there. And it's not just in the parking area. There's that little portion of the dead end that I understand used to kind of loop through at one point. So, you'd potentially be relocating the 5-car max at one point in that parking area. If those barriers got put there, you're displacing those into that dead end section, which I saw is, not necessarily going to be a great fit. If it's a well-used public access area, I think I heard the comment that it's a place that allows dogs, and that's not the places that don't. I just want to point out that's not a snob policy. Quite frankly, a lot of places have been told by DEP and others that if they continue to allow dogs at recreation facilities, they're not going to be eligible for future grants. So that's one reason why a lot of places prohibit that. It's not because they're anti-dog. I can tell you down the street from me at one very popular place that they can't use their dogs for that reason. I spoke with the rec director on that matter before. So yes, if this is one area that people think they can bring their dogs, that probably explains a lot of the use, and it makes sense because we had a few dogs come up to us on site. So that's absolutely happening out there. But my concern was it looked like it was potentially a well-used area, and if we were going to eliminate parking, then I wanted to know really what was the intent of the project. And if that was the case and we weren't meeting the intent, then why do it? So I'd rather put a pause on it, reconvene, and make sure everybody's on the same page before saying yes, let's deliver large concrete barriers that aren't going to be fun to try to relocate at another time if we decide it's not the appropriate use for them.
Makes sense. Yeah, so looking at the narrative, it doesn't say to replace the culvert, just cleaning it out. So I think the entirety of it was simply to block it off and fix the access and the parking. So I think that John was trying to meet the intent. If you have concerns, I'm happy to head out there with you both and DPW or whoever else you think needs to be there and have a conversation.
He did mention to me he would mark out in the field where he would like to put the barriers. So I can certainly reach out to him, send him a message, please do so, and then before anything gets delivered, we'll reconvene, look at the site, and like I said, try to make sure everybody's on the same page there. I just don't want this moving in a direction it shouldn't, that really serves no purpose and just makes it a maintenance matter in the future if we've got large concrete barriers and other things we have to deal with at some point.
Yep.
But if it's at the end of the day, if it's something that will be an improvement there, then let's move forward with it. But I just want to try to get those questions answered first.
Okay. Any further comments or questions? Okay, moving on, we have minutes to approve, September 24th. I do have 2 comments on the minutes. I'll send these to you, Brad. Carl Fawcett's name is spelled wrong. And then the vote on September 10th, on the September 10th minutes, that doesn't make, yeah, on the September 10th minutes, was summarized incorrectly. It was a 3-0 vote. Sorry, it was summarized as a 3-0 vote, but it was actually a 5-0 vote. Does anyone else have any comments on or amendments to the minutes? Yeah, go ahead, Dennis.
Tom, on what minutes are they? The September 24th minutes. I don't know if it's necessary or not, but for item number 7, the notice of intent for New England Power right of way, I had announced in the meeting that I was a butter. It doesn't say that, and it has me as an abstained vote. So I don't know if we need to clarify that or not. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Okay. Yeah, Dennis, if you could just send that amendment to Brad, and I'll send my amendments to you, Brad, and we can get those incorporated. If there are no further amendments, happy to take a motion to approve as amended.
Yeah, motion to approve the minutes of 24 September with amendments from Tom and Dennis.
Second.
All right, motion was made by Jim, seconded by David to approve as amended. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. That concludes our agenda. Does anyone have anything else they want to discuss tonight? Seeing none, happy to take a motion to adjourn.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion was made by Dennis, seconded by David to adjourn the meeting. This will be a roll call vote. Jim LaValle.
Aye.
Dennis Hubbard.
Aye.
David Millett.
Aye.
And Tom Seidenberg also votes aye. Thank you, everyone.